All right, everybody, welcome back here today. We're doing quite a bit of a new style of video here. I'm going to be talking about my top 10 guitar players of all time. Now, let me, preface this by saying that I'm not talking about the top 10 best technically guitar players of all time because, then some people that I know are better technical guitar players than some other people would obviously be up in the higher in my list. This is just my personal favorite. I'm taking into account, the sound of their guitar, the tone, their obviously their body of work and everything like that going on. And just, it's all personal preference. I'm aware I definitely am going to have probably a controversial list with some of my picks, but so be it. It's all subjective, and I'd love to see your guys' top tens down there. And this is something that's kind of forever changing for me, except for number one. Number one has remained the same for a long time, right? But these other ones have shifted around. There's been some people that are not even in this top 10 or in this honorable mention list because I got 5 honorable mentions that I'm going to include. But there's some people not even in the honorable mentions that sometimes sneak their way into top 10 for me. But with that being said, I grabbed just 2 albums, to show of the people because I don't want to. If I were to grab every album I have of this guy or this guy, I'd be get a stack load here. So I just grabbed a couple of records for each of these numbers here. So with that being said, let me get this situated. All right. So we'll start with number 10. My number 10 favorite guitar player of all time, we're talking about Randy Rhoads. I just grabbed these 2, obviously very prominent pieces. Randy Rhoads, it's a situation where it's sad we didn't get any more of him. We've got these 2 Ozzy records. I guess you could count, the tribute album, which is live, with him on there with Ozzy. And then, of course, the early Quiet Riot stuff he was on. But I've always loved Randy Rhoads. I love how he's incorporated neoclassical techniques, like especially, during the song Diary of a Madman. I've always loved that song. Been one of my favorite Ozzy songs ever. And I just think Randy Rhoads is a phenomenal guitar player. I love his tone. It's kind of chaotic, but, reined in at the same time. And his solos are, they're some of the most memorable solos ever, in guitar history. So he's just an all-time classic to me. I've always been a huge Randy Rhoads fan. And it's really hard picking, with any of the Ozzy guitar players. He's a guy who's just constantly had guitar players, that were incredible. But number 10, we're going with Randy Rhoads. Number 9, we're going with Yngwie Malmsteen. And, this kind of following up with Randy Rhoads, the neoclassical style, which, Yngwie is so known for. And he has just his famous, the scales he does. I love his sound on that, Fender Stratocaster with them, and he's got a cool guitar with the scalloped, fretboard and everything. And, of course, he's been in his first band, Steeler, which I've got a record of. He's been in Alcatraz, of course. He's of course been done his solo thing, and Yngwie's a guy where over time it's not that he's a one trick pony, but it's kind of where he's made himself one, where he just kind of does the same thing on these albums that he's been dropping for the past decade or so, which sucks because he's such a talented guitar player and he could do so much more. I miss whenever he was kind of experimenting more, like for example on the Fire and Ice album that I showed, he uses a little bit of wah pedal and everything like that. But Yngwie is an incredible guitar player, and I always just am wowed whenever I hear him play. And I've seen him live. Wasn't the greatest showing for him. If you've seen my concert memories video, he did blow me away, but that's a whole different story. But Yngwie he's one of my favorite guitar players. He blows me away, and he has some just incredible solos. And he always has his little flair to everything. So that is my number 9. My number 8 is going to be Paul Gilbert, of course, in Racer X, Mr. Big. just such an incredible guitar player. The technique, the speed. I mean, he has got to be one of the fastest guys out there. You know, I mean, his solo career is amazing as well. I love his solos. He can get real bluesy, especially on his first solo record. And you know, and even some of the stuff with Mr. Big. And he's just such a phenomenal guitar player and a great songwriter too. And he gets really, you know, these days, you know, he does a lot of experimenting and really always kind of has on his solo records, like tried to do something different, which I really respect. And I love his tone. And Paul Gilbert's always been up in the upper echelon of guitar players for me, for sure. Especially, you know, again, that Racer X, just the shredding he's doing on there is just mind blowing. That was my introduction to Paul Gilbert. So that is who number 8 is. Now we're looking at number 7. We're talking about George Lynch from Dokken and Lynch Mob, of course. And, you know, you talk about a guy that you know immediately who it is when you hear him play. You know, and of course he's with Lynch Mob and he's been in a bunch of other projects as well. But I mean, George Lynch, especially during the 80s with Dokken, was just blowing people away. His guitar tone and just his, you know, his pinch harmonics and everything are just a thing of beauty. And he's had some of my favorite guitar solos ever. And Lynch has always been just an all-time great guitar player for me. I just have a blast listening to anything he does. And he's just phenomenal. And, you know, that may be kind of controversial. I know a lot of people respect him, but some people think, you know, Dokken, they're in kind of the hair metal category. I don't know if you really would say that or not. You know, they're kind of hard rock, heavy metal to me. But George Lynch, if there's one thing for sure about Dokken, it's that George Lynch is a freaking badass. So then we're going to go with number 6. We're talking about Vivian Campbell, obviously from Dio, River Dogs. You know, more recently, you know, he's been with Def Leppard and since, you know, the mid-late 90s and has been with them since. And Vivian, he's another guy who's I've always loved ever since I first heard my first Dio album that I listened all the way through was Last in Line. And I've been in love with his guitar playing ever since. And, you know, even seeing him do some stuff like River Dogs and being able to really, you know, shred it on that and do something a little bit different. It's just a phenomenal thing. And Vivian, you know, even people kind of give him some slack or give him kind of a little bit of flack for being in Def Leppard and not really showcasing a lot. But really, if you listen to like the 1999 album, Euphoria and stuff, he's got some really sick solos on there. And you know, he's another guy whose guitar tone just blows me away every time. And Vivian, he's another guy too who also can really play really fast. He has some awesome riffs, awesome licks in there. One of my all-time favorites for sure. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We're going to go with number 5. And number 5 for me, I actually don't have any props for. I need to change that. We're talking about Reb Beach. Yeah, that's going to shock a lot of people. From Winger, he's played with Dokken on one of their later 2000s albums. And, you know, I think Winger gets a lot of hate. I'm a big fan of them. I think they're just an incredible songwriters. Kip Winger's a great bass player, great singer. And especially if you dive deep in their catalog and everything. But Reb Beach, the thing that sold me on him was I listened to his fusion demos that he recorded, I believe, in like the mid-90s, but they released it in like the early 2000s, I think 2002 or 1. And it's just a jazz fusion chill guitar playing masterpiece to me, and it's one of my favorite guitar you know, instrumental albums of all time. And it's just a great thing. And again, I don't have any props for that. I need to get me some Winger stuff. It's kind of hard to get a hold of, but I'll do it eventually. And I even love Red Beach, some of his other solo stuff where he sings on. And just an incredible guitar player, insanely underrated. And it's mainly because, again, kind of getting, you know, grouped in with, which I don't know if I'm going to argue that Winger's not one of the hair kind of glam bands, but, you know, they get a bad rap, I think, you know, especially with the whole thing with Metallica, that feud with them back then. And they get a bad rap whenever they're an awesome group of talented musicians, with Red Beach being, again, I mean, look, I put him above some people. Maybe he's not better technically than some of the guys like Paul Gilbert and such, but I love his guitar tone. It's so clean. I love his just his solos. And again, check out the Fusion demos and see what you think about Red Beach then if you're not really sold on him. So, my number 4, I'm going to go with Joe Satriani. Can't go wrong with him. You know, this guy influenced so many people, played a part in teaching Steve Vai, and, you know, even played a part in teaching Kirk Hammett from Metallica. And you talk about a guy who's got just one of the smoothest play styles and tones out there. Joe Satriani, I love. Obviously, Surfing with the Alien is a masterpiece of a record. Flying in a Blue Dream, you know, all that stuff is just amazing. And I love his body of work. He's another guy who will, you know, shake up things and do things a little bit different, and kind of has that bluesy kind of edge to him that I really like. And he can speed it up. He can do it all, you know. And Joe Satriani has been a massive influence again on so many guitar players. And I just think listening to his solo records, you know, I mean, it's just they're an experience for sure. And several of them are some of my favorite instrumental, you know, guitar albums of all time. And so that's the beauty about Joe Satriani. He's just fantastic. And again, I just love the cleanliness of his tone, coupled with his technique, as well as kind of the bluesy stuff he kind of brings to the table. Then my number 3, we're going to talk about Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath. Showing off a couple of those there. You know, what's there that hasn't been said about Tony Iommi, right? The riff god, you know, the riff master. The dude can just write a riff like nobody's business. You know, if there were a list of top 10 riffs, top 20, I mean, how many of those are going to be Tony Iommi? Probably a lot of them, if not all of them. That's how awesome Tony Iommi is with Black Sabbath. You know, just freaking phenomenal. I mean, and you know, the body of work he's got behind him. I talk about a guitar tone again. I think it's like one of the coolest guitar tones out there, and like as far as heaviness goes and everything. And just, he's another guy, you hear that chunky Sabbath tone, you know who it is. If he's guest appearance, you know, being a guest on somebody else's work or anything, you know it's Tony Iommi when you hear it. And he, you know, I'm only talking about his riffs, but dude can shred too. Let's not get that wrong, because he can go off. He's been doing it for decades. On even the early Black Sabbath stuff, he was, you know, making some of the most memorable solos of all time, as well as riffs. So Tony Iommi, and he's been a massive influence to me when it comes to guitar playing and everything as well. So just absolutely love him. And he almost was my number 2. Again, this list kind of shakes up and everything, but my number 2, I got to go with the guy who actually passed away this year, or it may have been late last year. John Sykes, Blue Murder, Whitesnake. You know, he's played in Thin Lizzy. Just probably, you know, not even probably. He's got my favorite guitar tone of all time, especially on that Whitesnake 87 album, man. That is like the cleanest guitar tone, yet with such a bite to it. And a lot of that goes into the production of that album as well. And it's just phenomenal. John Sykes is another massive influence to me on guitar. I love like the feel in his solos. You feel every note, you know, every bend, all the shred stuff he can do. And he can even break it down, you know, acoustically, you know, and he's done a bunch of solo records out there. It's a shame he didn't get more material of him, as, you know, as the years kind of went by. He kind of didn't do a lot of releases or anything, would drop a single here and there, and they were awesome every time. But, you know, I was always hoping for, you know, another solo album to drop, especially in like 2020 and that kind of time period where he was releasing singles here and there. But John Sykes, again, has my favorite guitar tone of all time, and it is just a beautiful sound, and I just love the way he does things. Again, every bend, every note he hits, you just feel the emotion that he's trying to convey with the instrument. Now, my number 1, if you guys have you know, been fans of the channel for a long time, you already knew who this was going to be. It's Steve Vai, right? I mean, come on. He's been in Alcatraz. He's been, he has played for David Lee Roth. He's guested on so many people's work. Just easily my favorite guitar player of all time. That's never changed ever since I first heard Steve Vai. just the way, man, I can't say enough about him. How his technique, his feel, his tone, everything, that I was talking about these other guys, he just has all that wrapped into one big ball of greatness right now. And I saw Steve Vai live, and that was just such a phenomenal show to see. A dream come true for me getting to see Steve, and he tore it up. His solo albums, which we just recently did the re-ranking of with that latest record he had. You know, go watch that and see me talk about some of those albums, because a lot of them, maybe have kind of go under the radar. Of course, the two I showed, Passion Warfare and Alien Love Secrets, get a lot of praise, as they should. But his discography, his library is vast, and it's awesome. He doesn't have a bad solo album, if you ask me. I love them all. And he is another guy who will go out of his way to be unique and try different things, and I love that about him. And yet again, another guy who you hear him guesting on something, and you know it's him immediately when he plays the first note. Steve Vai, he blows me away. I watch live stuff of him all the time, footage and stuff, and it's just beautiful. And he can shred, he can play the blues, he can, talk about the emotion, listen to Tender Surrender. That's such a powerful, powerful song. And For the Love of God and stuff like that. Some of those big, heavy hitters of his are just such powerful, powerful tracks with so much emotion in them. And again, he's just my all-time favorite guitar player. Now for the honorable mentions, I kind of wrote some down here. I didn't grab some stuff. I didn't grab any, records from these guys in the honorable mentions list. Eddie Van Halen's got to get a shout out. Come on, it's Eddie Van Halen. What more needs to be said? The dude can shred. He was changing the game back in the late 70s with, the solo Eruption. I mean, that inspired just about everybody on this list, right? So, yeah, I mean, it probably, looking at it, he inspired literally everybody on this list, because all these guys followed Eddie Van Halen. So, then John Petrucci from Dream Theater. You talk about a cool sound and technique. He's a guy who, if I was going based off, top 10 best, he would be way up in the rankings, if not, number 1 or 2 as far as technique goes. Such a technical artist. I love Petrucci. He's been up my top 10 before. He just kind of didn't quite make it this time, but I love him to death. Jerry Cantrell, I'm going to give a shout out to him from Alice in Chains. Another riff master, and a guy whose solos are just like ingrained in the songs that he does with Alice in Chains and his solo work. And that's an awesome thing when the solos aren't just some crazy, random nonsense, right? It's something that's really ingrained as a part of the song that you could even sing along to. His solos are that iconic, as well as the riffs. And then I got to go with Marty Friedman of, Megadeth, of course, Cacophony, his solo work. Marty's such another technical player, does a lot of the neoclassical stuff, and has some of the coolest riffs and solos of all time. Easily, for me, I think he's the best guitar player a thrash band has ever had, and there's been some great ones. I could go on and on about some of the guys who didn't make the list, right? But Marty Friedman is just freaking phenomenal. Then I got to shout out Adrian Smith / Dave Murray. I'm kind of grouped them together. And I guess you could say Yannick Gers. I mean, I think Smith and Murray kind of are the main forefront of Iron Maiden's guitar players. They were for most of the career. Yannick got thrown in there. I think he gets a lot of hate. He is really good, especially if you listen to him on Bruce Dickinson's solo album, Tattooed Millionaire, and everything. But, for me, Adrian Smith and Dave Murray, just the twin-headed, freaking beasts they are for Iron Maiden. And I saw Iron Maiden live, and they were just going back and forth and shredding it up, and have some very memorable solos as well, and they also have a really unique, tone to them. There's that Iron Maiden guitar tone that is just, it's unlike anything else. Then I'm going to give a shout out also to kind of a shocking one, right? Jamie West Storm from The Fix, because, he's got one of the, probably to me, the cleanest guitar tone I've ever heard, and makes some funky sounds, right? And they're not, obviously The Fix aren't like a metal band or nothing. They're like 80s synth pop, but like, man, you listen to, just it sounds like chimes or something. Just has such a cool sound to him that I had to give him a shout out as well. But again, you know, I could go on and on about people that I could put on this honorable mentions list, and we'd be sitting here for a couple hours, right? But you know, this is kind of what I got for the list today. It could change next week, right? You just never know. Again, the ones that stayed the same for years now for me, and probably always will be, is Steve Vai being my number one. But the other guys have shifted around. Some of these honorable mention guys have been on there before. Some people who are not on the honorable mentions list have also made it on my top 10 before, right? This stuff is always kind of forever changing, and that's the fun thing about it, you know. There's so many great artists out there. And I definitely want to hear your guys' thoughts about my list. Maybe if, you know, you disagree. If you agree, cool. If you disagree, cool. Tell me your favorites down there in the comments, and I would love to see your guys' top 10. And again, it's about top 10 of my personal favorite, not who the best is, right? Just ones that I connect to, ones that really, you know, that I just get over the moon about hearing, regardless of who is technically the best player. You know, for example, again, with John Petrucci, I know he's probably technically a better player than the likes of, you know, even Tony Iommi, which is, you know, might sound like sacrilege to some people, but clearly, you know, to me, I like Tony Iommi better. So that's what this list was about. It wasn't about trying to dissect who's technically the most. It's about my personal favorites and the guitar players I connect to most. So everybody drop down there in the comments your top 10, 20, however many you want to give me down there, within some of your reasons why, favorite albums, songs, all that good stuff down there. So anyways, guys, like, subscribe, comment, and stay tuned for some more stuff coming up. We got that final Talas album review / ranking video coming up soon, maybe tomorrow, probably tomorrow. And then we also I don't know about Megadeth's new album, of course, which I just, you know, recently ranked all their stuff. But I'm going to do a review of that album. I've kind of let it sit for a little while and just kind of really wanted to digest the album before I just jumped right into doing a review. But yeah, we're going to do that as well, and then do a re-ranking with that album included. So lots of cool stuff coming up. Anyways, guys, like, subscribe, and comment. Thanks.